Rivers flow through time. The 4 rivers of Wabash County have helped shape its history. Long ago, along their shores, lived the Miami and Potawatomi Indians.
The Miami's main livelihood was made off the river. I mean, they trapped the rivers. The catfish was their main priority fish.
In 1816, Indiana gained statehood, but few white pioneers lived in its northern region. The Paradise Spring Treaty paved the way for white settlement.
The Treaty of Paradise Spring, 1826, was a negotiation between the American government and the people of the Miami and Potawatomi nations. That treaty was one of several. However, it is the one that made the Wabash Erie Canal possible.
Nearly a decade later, the Wabash and Erie Canal was born. 468 miles long, connecting the Great Lakes with the Ohio River. At the time, it was the longest man-made river canal in the U.S. and the second longest in the world. 600 Irish immigrants were largely responsible for building the canal, and many settled in LaGros. Canal boats brought new residents and supplies to the county. People drawn to this new frontier built homes, schools, and churches. Farms and businesses were established. Canal boats now made it possible to ship excess grain and manufactured goods, opening new markets and creating economic prosperity in the region. Railroad service, beginning in 1856, signaled the demise of the canal. Steam engine trains on solid tracks were faster and more reliable than the canal.
There were 20 passenger trains a day stopping here. And in the heyday of passenger train transportation, you could go from the station platform here in Wabash to virtually any point in the United States. And businesses here, merchants depended upon the railroads for the delivery of their goods.
Well, the produce business was very dependent on the railroads, and it was an integral part of our business. Wabash Produce started in 1915. During that time, this building was part of the Big Four shops, built in 1872. They started to tear down the buildings in 1925, and my uncle decided to buy one of the buildings. So he bought this building right here. When they refurbished this building, it was like heaven sent. The cars would come right up to the dock, and we got produce from all over the world.
Back in the early days of the railroad, they brought in items that the local people wouldn't necessarily see, particularly with the advent of the refrigerated cars. All of a sudden, people saw oranges for sale. They never saw an orange before. They'd heard of them, but at Christmas time, that was a big deal to get an orange. Today, it wouldn't be a big deal, but back then it was.
Wabash County's landscape was once covered with thick forests. Over the years, much of it was cut to supply wood for companies making cabinets and furniture, but it was largely cleared for farming.
My grandpa bought the farm out here down the road a half mile in 1906, but he didn't move out here until 1911. And he brought this wagon with him on the train. It's a Studebaker. We used these wagons up to about 1949 or 50 when we bought some rubber-tired ones.
Father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather were all farmers south of Wabash. Some days it's hot, and some days it's cold, but we survive. We survive. Tractors are better than the horses because we've got cabs with either air conditioner or heater, and so you put in longer hours and you're not as tired. generally at night, but if you start at 6 and get home at 10 at night, well, you get kind of tired.
The older we get, the tighter we get.
Oh, speak for yourself, George.
In the early years, as farming evolved, so did other related businesses.
Every town along this Eel River had a mill, at least one, because they were key supplier of food for man and beast.
My grandfather came to Stockdale as a stone dresser in 1881. This mill produced the very finest grade of flour. It was a pure white flour. Everything was sifted out, and so it was naturally white, didn't require any bleaching. They used what was called a soft winter wheat here, so it was a high-grade flour.
I used to come to the mill here when I was a knee-high to a duck, and with my dad. And when I was 18, I was looking for a job, and I worked here for about 2 years. Now understand, I'm 18 years old, and a man would come in with 2 bags of corn, ear corn, and he would want it cracked. And I would have to go downstairs and put the belt on the oat huller. Then I'd have to go upstairs and I'd have to shut off one of the spouts up there, and then I'd have to open up another spout, and my revenue from that was 6 to 8 cents. And I thought, if he'd just bring it a half a dozen or a dozen, I wouldn't have all that work. And in the meantime, we would talk about the weather. We'd, solve a few things in the world and everything. And pretty soon I said, if you could bring a half a dozen or a dozen bags, I said, you wouldn't have to come so often. And I said, you'd save gas and time, and I wouldn't have to change that oat huller over and change all them belts. And he stood there a minute, and he kind of raked his toe around a little bit, and he said, we wouldn't get a visit very often, would we? And I said, yeah. I said, I see what you mean. I said, I'll see you next week. From then on, he brought me 2 bags every week, just like he had been. And that's what this mill has meant to a lot of people. It was a place that you could come, and you was welcome, and you enjoyed coming, and you could get your work done.
From farm fields to the city of Wabash, prosperity shone throughout the county. The boldness and adventurous spirit of Wabash County came to light at 8 p.m. on March 31st, 1880. Wabash became the first city in the world to be electrically illuminated. More than 10,000 people watched as the 4 brush arc lamps suspended over the new Wabash County Courthouse grew brilliant. It made world history.
Well, we learned that it was the first electrically lighted city in the world, and we learned about the history of the courthouse, and I learned some of the stories that people thought, like they thought their chickens wouldn't lay eggs because it was too light out, and they thought their corn would grow twice as fast, so they'd be able to get 2 crops in 1 year.
By the late 19th century, Wabash County was booming. Businesses were creating wealth, reflected in elegant homes, furniture, public buildings, and public art. After the turn of the century, the invention of the horseless carriage put new businesses on the road. The DeWitt car, produced in North Manchester, and trucks produced by the Service Motor Truck Company. During World War I, Liberty trucks rolled off the company's production lines and supplied the troops.
Edwin Ford, my great-grandfather, he was an inventor. He devised a meter box that would be buried in a meter pit in someone's yard, and that metering would then allow a water company to bill a consumer for the water used without going into the person's house to read the meter. The Ford Meter Box Company relocated to Wabash in 1911 to what is now the basement of Deal Machine, and out here in about 1951 to this site.
Mark Honeywell started his heating and cooling specialties business here in Wabash about 1900, and as I'm sure most everyone knows, it grew into an international corporation.
The Peabody Seating Company was known internationally, and it was a tremendous employer in the town.
Then came hard times.
The paper had a little article in it, something about the stock market crashing in New York. Well, shucks, there was nobody there in Manchester that had any stock anyway, so how could that influence us?
And back in those Depression days, the land got as high as $300 an acre, and almost overnight it's only worth $60. And Dad, till the day he died, could tell you some of the best farmers and the hardest working farmers in Wabash County lost it all. And he could tell you the ones that made it and the ones that didn't.
One of the tough times in this lumber business that my father and grandfather went through was the Depression. In 1931, their salaries were $1,600 for the year. And I remember my father telling me that they got $600 cash and a $1,000 check, and he held the $1,000 check for 3 years till it was good. So it was really tough getting through the Depression, but they survived.
By the end of the 1930s, things were starting to turn around. Businesses once again began to prosper. But soon, war loomed on the horizon. When the United States entered World War II, the county supported the effort with troops and supplies. After the war, troops returned home to families, farms, and factories, getting back into their routines and enjoying life. But by the late 1950s, manufacturing began a cycle of decline. As people dealt with this transition, the county's landscape went through a transition of its own.
We were beginning to hear the story that the reservoirs were going to be coming into our county, and everybody was, not happy about that, because what was it going to do to our community, to our county? But we also knew that we had gone through lots of floods and lots of destruction because of high waters.
These devastating floods prompted the damming of the Salamone and Mississinewa rivers in the 1960s.
I'm standing on this bridge here that was built over the Mississinewa, and actually behind me here is where my former home was, and the town of Somerset.
While the reservoirs brought flood control, towns were displaced or destroyed in the process.
It's created a whole new life for us here in Wabash County. The reservoirs have, because we have Mississinewa and Salamone both to enjoy, and that brings in lots of visitors into our county that we all benefit from.
Wabash County has a rich past, full of boldness and inventiveness that continues today. Towns with community spirit at heart, a commitment to preservation while looking forward, and always a sense of home.
There's the pleasure of being in familiar places, driving down familiar streets, seeing the buildings that I've seen since I was a little child. So it's very satisfying to be able to live in your hometown.
And I love the town, I love the architecture, and there's something new in each block and something exciting.
For a small community like this, facilities here are remarkable.
We're very fortunate to have Manchester College here and the cultural influence that it has.
The primary reason that I hear is the quality of life, and it's a great place to raise a family.
It's a good, honest community, and you can basically trust people.
I like it living on the farm because you don't have cars going by at night and everything. We have cats and we have pygmy goats, we have ducks, pigs.
Wabash County is filled with citizens who care for this county.
Easy to get around, a safe place to live, very little crime, and nice neighbors.